Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing a UZ VVT-i modular harness for a Link X-Treme ECU. So let's get into it. Right guys, as I said, this is a UZ VVT-i modular harness. Obviously, I've not said 1 or 3 UZ because it does work for both. In this case, it's a 3 UZ VVT-i 6-speed that we're going to be working with. But as I said, it works on both 1 UZ and 3 UZ VVT-i. It's for a Link X-Treme. Now, it does work for either the G4 Plus or the G4-X, as the wiring is obviously exactly the same. Now, as you can see, it is a brand new harness. So first thing we're going to do is let's take a look at the process of building the harness, and you can see what goes into making these harnesses and all the individual sub harnesses, which we'll go through in the layout section. So see you in a second. So as you can see, all brand new bolts, all brand new connectors, obviously all the sub harnesses that we're going to go through as part of the layout. So what we're going to be doing today is, as per usual, we're going to go through the layout of the harness. We're going to explain everything, where it goes to, how it connects, and obviously things that you can change, etc. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the testing with the ignition on, and obviously testing with the engine running. Okay. Right, so let's start with the layout. So obviously on the layout, we're going to come here over to the ECU and start over there. So again, just 2 connectors, really simple, nothing major there at all. They're both keyed differently, so you can't plug them into the wrong place. So again, no dramas there at all. And obviously the way the harness is done, it kind of dictates exactly where they go. All right. This is obviously a USB port. So again, that's going to a cable that's going into the laptop over there. So that's how we can communicate and set up the ECU on the laptop. Underneath there is another port there, which I think is another CAN expansion port. Obviously, we don't use that one as part of our harnesses, but it is available to you guys if you do want to use it. Okay. Right, so those are those 2 plugs over there. They then come down to this breakout section over here. And what we'll do is we're going to go through the next one, which is this little section that pops around there, and that goes over to our fuse box. Okay, so this is a completely independent fuse box, and there are only 3 connectors in there. They are all different connectors, so again, you can't plug them into the wrong place. So super simple, nothing major there at all that you can get wrong. Okay. Coming back to the breakout point over here, on this side, we have a couple of things coming out. So first of all, we have this section which goes over to the fuse box. So again, this is a lot of the stuff that goes from the ECU to the fuse box. That's a lot of stuff that goes from the fuse box to the engine harness itself, okay? Also coming out here, we have a couple of expansion plugs. So basically these are unused inputs and outputs. So we take them to a DTM connector so you guys don't have to worry about pinning anything in the ECU. Basically everything on the ECU is pinned out apart from what is not there. So again, we give a complete pinout of the entire ECU so you can see exactly where everything goes. Okay, But first of all, we have our analog plug. Okay, it's a 6-pin DTM connector over there. We then have our digital plug, which is a 4-pin DTM connector over there. And then we have our CAN plug. So again, this is CAN high, CAN low, 12 volts and a ground, and that is fused through the fuse box over there. So again, it can be used to power things like, in this case, the customer is using a Haltech WB2. Obviously V8, we want to put 2 Lambda sensors on, one for each bank. This is the most cost-effective way to do that. Okay. Right, so that's that. But we could also then daisy chain off of there and take it to a dash or anything along those lines, or EGT sensors, whatever you want basically, as long as there's not too much on the CAN bus and you start getting confused messages. Okay, so as I've said before, one of the other nice things about the Haltech stuff when it comes to their CAN modules is they do give you 2 plugs on there. So in this case, obviously at the moment, this is the end of our CAN bus, so it's going from the ECU down to there. So we have actually used the second plug just to put a terminating resistor in there to complete the CAN bus. But obviously if we wanted to add something on, you could unplug that, plug in the new device, and it's already got 12 volts and ground coming from our harness over there. And then you would just plug this into the other one over there. So if you're crazy, and I've seen some guys do it, they actually buy effectively 4 of these and they put a Lambda sensor in each individual cylinder. And it's super easy to do. You just go from there to the next one, there to the next one, there to the next one. Okay. So again, super, super nice. And obviously you can add a lot of other stuff like dashes, etc. onto that CAN bus as well. Okay. Right, these ones we're going to go through at the end with the fuse box plugs as part of our customer connector layout. So again, don't stress about that for now. We're going to come back and we're going to go over that. Okay. Right, moving along here, we then end up at our little grommet. Again, we've put a piece of SCL in there, but we haven't actually heat shrunk it down because obviously we want you guys to move it to where you are going to require it in your vehicle because everyone is different. Once you get it to the correct position, then obviously you can heat shrink that down. It's got an epoxy layer in there, so obviously it will completely seal the harness from the outside once you do that. Okay. Moving along from there, we then end up at our molded T-piece boot. So again, this is where the harness splits up. You're going to have one section that's going down towards the front of the engine there, and we have another section that's going around the other side of the engine there. Okay, right, so before I come onto this section over here, I'm just going to do these little breakout branches over here. Okay, so the first one at the top here is going to be Injector. So this is for our Injector sub harness. Now normally on a naturally aspirated or standard management ECU, this would have the injectors, because as you can see, it runs underneath the intake and pops out here and over here. Okay, and that's obviously your injectors. Now in this case, he's not using Denso injectors, he's using injectors that have a U-scar connector on. So again, I'm just adapting that to those ones for our testing purposes, but obviously he would have these plugged directly in. So again, the nice thing with this is that if you ever change your injectors, you can just give us a shout. We'll build you a new one for whatever injector you want. So let's say you have EV1 style injector connector, or you want to go back to a Denso style connector. Just phone us up, we'll make you a new harness, and then you just unplug your old one, plug in your new one, and away you go. Okay, now in this case, this particular customer has actually got a turbocharged 3UZ. So what we've done is, instead of having the ACIS system, which isn't really that much use when you are turbocharged, we've replaced that with a Mac Boost solenoid. And obviously the fact is, with this particular ECU, the X-Treme, we have run out of outputs. So again, we need to use the ACIS, what would be the ACIS output for the Mac. So again, this is going to go to a Mac Boost solenoid, which is going to control his boost. Okay, right, so that's the injector one over there. Underneath there, we've got our sub harness. Again, a little 8-pin DTM connector there. That's going underneath the intake. I'm actually going to cut to a picture now. So you can see there, it's going along, and then it goes to the starter solenoid, and then it goes to knock 1, and then it goes to knock 2. Okay, right, so again, really, really nice and simple. Now, as you'll see on this one, it is a 3UZ 6-speed that this customer has. So he does actually have wideband knock sensors as standard on his engine. Okay, so again, we just made a harness to interface with those particular ones. Obviously, with this one, it is shielded cable all the way from here to the ECU, because obviously knock sensor is quite a sensitive signal, so we make sure that's correct. Now, obviously, we do make this like this, even if you are running a 3UZ 5-speed or a 1UZ VVT-i and you had the narrowband knock sensors, you're more than happy to use that, but we can also upgrade you. We can supply you with Bosch wideband knock sensors and the studs and the nuts and everything ready just to bolt it all straight in as well for you guys with the 3UZ 5-speed and 1UZ VVT-i models. Okay. Next up on here is going to be our fuel connector. It's a 4-pin fuel connector over there, and that means we have the ability to add fuel pressure and temperature in this particular case. Obviously, the customer's not opted for that for this harness, so we've got a little blanking plug there with seals in there, so obviously that doesn't get filled with water while it's not being used. But If the customer changes his mind and wanted to add a fuel pressure sensor, again, he can just give us a shout. We can supply you both the sub harness and the sensor as well, send it out the door for you, and you can just plug it in and set it up on the laptop. So again, super straightforward. And obviously this is the reason we do it, is obviously you guys change your mind. So we always want to make sure that we have that option open to you, because obviously these are completely twisted harnesses. There's no opening these up and adding stuff in later. So it's better to add stuff now, and even if it just means blanking it off. And then obviously if you want to add it on later, feel free. We can phone us up, send you whatever harness you want, whatever sensor you want, and again, just plug it in and set it up on there. Okay. It does also mean that this is physically an analog voltage input and a temp input. So again, even if you didn't want to run a fuel, you could run something else as well. Not quite sure off the top of my head what you'd want to run, but anyway, the ability is there for you to do that. Okay. Right, so those are the three there. And then lastly, you can see snaking over here, and that's going to be our earthing points. There's one earthing point on this engine harness, and it's going to bolt to the cylinder head. And obviously this is a 3UZ, so it's going to use the M10 bolt that is standard on there. We would still use the same one on a VVT-i, but a VVT-i would normally have the bigger M12 on there. Okay, obviously we just then ask you to get a smaller bolt and then bolt it in there, because this bolt hole is actually there on a 1UZ VVT-i as well, so it's no problem to use that one on both a 1UZ VVT-i and a 3UZ VVT-i. Okay, right, so that's all the sections that pop out over there. So let's get back over to here and start going along here. So straight out of the boot over here, we have our first break off, and that's going to be to ignition left. Okay, now obviously again, little sub harness over there, so he's running the standard 3UZ coils. So again, really nice and simple. We've just made a harness for that. Obviously we don't require ignition feedback from there, so that's why you only see 3 out of the 4 wires in there. But again, if the customer changes his mind and wanted to run Audi R8 coils or Nissan R35 coils, he could just phone us up. We'll make him the small harness section, and he just plugs it in and obviously changes the coils. Again, no need to change the actual main engine harness. And again, as you can see, guys, everything is labeled for you nicely on here, so you shouldn't have any issues at all with plugging it all in. Okay. Now then, moving along from there, the harness runs along there, and then we have another breakout section over here. Obviously, this would normally be a little bit more forward. But anyway, right, this is the cam sensor for the left inlet cam. Okay, so obviously this is a VVT-i engine. Now we do have 3 cam sensors on a VVT-i engine. We have 1 on each inlet cam, so we'll see the other one in a minute when we go around there. Okay, this is the one for the left bank. There's 3 teeth on this cam lobe, or not lobe, sorry, on this camshaft. There's 3 teeth that this is measuring, and obviously this is allowing the ECU to see how much advance and retard of the cam is being done. Obviously the ECU is commanding the cam to advance or retard, and this is just a check to see if it's doing what it should be doing. Okay, right, so moving along from there, we come down to here, and we have another breakout section at the front over here. So there's a pipe in the way there. Another breakout section at the front over here, and that's going to go to your oil control valve for your left bank. Okay, so again, labeled OCV, oil control valve. So again, this is what's actually advancing and retarding your camshaft. And so this is obviously controlled by the ECU. Okay, also breaking out there, because you can see a second branch over there, that's going to be the front cam sensor. Okay, so this one is actually labeled as cam. If I can twist that around. No. Anyway, that one is labeled as cam sensor. Now this one is a single tooth on the cam pulley. Okay, so this is what the ECU is going to use to time itself up into fully sequential. Obviously we're running X-Treme ECU, so we have 8 individual injector and ignition outputs. So we are running this engine fully sequential. So again, this is helping our ECU to synchronize into the 720-degree cycle, and it's a single tooth on this cam that is doing that. Okay, right. So the harness moves along through there. We have a couple of clips over here, and we break out just on the other side over there. Okay, now there's a section that pops down through there. See, it goes through the hole through there, pops down through there, and it goes to the crank sensor. Again, got your little label in there. Super nice, simple and straightforward, nothing to go wrong there. Okay, also coming out of there, we then have our oil harness. Okay, now this is a 6-pin plug because we do have quite a lot in there. Okay, so first of all, we have our oil pressure switch. So this is what comes standard on either a 1 or a 3UZ VVT-i. So that's your oil pressure switch. So there's an allocation for that in there. Okay, it also comes out at the fuse box. but obviously because we take it to the ECU as well. Also inside here is the ability to add oil pressure sensor and a oil temperature sensor. So you can literally add all three of those things. You can have the oil pressure switch, you can have an oil pressure sensor, and you can have an oil temperature sensor. So again, all included in that plug over there. So in this case, we're just opting for the oil pressure switch for now. But if the customer wanted to upgrade, he could give us a call. We could supply him with one of those Bosch dual pressure and temp sensors and make him a new harness over there. And we could even have that sensor on as well as the oil pressure switch if you wanted to keep that as a backup. Okay, so that's that section down there. Really straightforward. Okay, so again, we've already gone through all of this, so I'm going to pop over to the other side now, and we're going to carry on through there. Righty-ho. Okay, just quickly while I'm here, you'll see I've used a couple of P-clamps to hold the harness down here. That is perfectly normal. You guys can do that, absolutely no problem at all. Okay, right, so the next breakout is here at the P-clamp over there. Couple of things going to come out over here. First of all, we have our map sensor. Okay, so again, he's obviously running a turbocharged engine, so we've got a 2.5 bar map sensor rather than the 1.15 bar, which is what you use on a naturally aspirated engine. Okay, next up is an APP, accelerator pedal position. Okay, so again, because of the 3UZ, he is going to be obviously using a pedal to control it, but we've obviously put this in here. And for the 1UZ VVT-Is, normally with your throttle body, which is this one down here, okay, if I move that out the way, you'll basically see that we've got our TPS connector over there, we've got our throttle motor connector over there, and this is actually an accelerator position sensor. Okay, so if this harness was going on a 1UZ VVT-I, this harness would just come forward, have a plug here, and then it would plug into the accelerator pedal position. Now, obviously, as you can imagine, if you were running a 1UZ VVT-I, you could actually still use an accelerator pedal that goes inside the vehicle. You don't have to use that one that goes on to there. Okay, remember with the 1UZ VVT-I, it's still drive-by-wire, so that actual thing that the accelerator cable goes onto is not actually connected to the butterfly valve. The butterfly valve could operate completely independently of that, so you could literally bolt the throttle body on, not put an accelerator cable on, wire in a pedal, or we can make your harness to do an electronic pedal, and you can still use it on a 1UZ VVT-I. So there's no need for you to actually use that, but we obviously keep both options open for you guys. Okay, right. And then lastly is going to be ignition right. Okay, so again, that's ignition 8, 6, 4, and 2. So I didn't say at the beginning. If you look at the engine from the back of the engine, which is where you should be looking at it, obviously left is that side and right is this side. Left is all the odd numbers, so you've got 1, 3, 5, and 7. Right is all the even numbers, so you've got 2, 4, 6, and 8. Okay, same applies for the injectors as well. So obviously injector 2, 4, 6, and 8, 1, 3, 5, and 7. Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. So then the harness moves along to over there. There are mounting points there and there, so I put one in just to show you sort of what it would look like if you P-clamped it down over there. But we have a breakout section over here, and that goes to the cam sensor on the right bank. So again, that's labeled VVR. Okay, obviously it's for the VVT-I, so that's why it's called VVR. Okay, right. So moving along from there, we have another breakout at the front over here. Okay. Right, so the first one that pops out over here is going to be coolant temperature. Okay, so this is the coolant temperature that's for the ECU. This sensor will be in your engine. It's completely standard, so this is going to plug directly in. So that's why you can see it's a normal standard Toyota plug on there. Okay, what we also have out here, okay, is a temp wire. Now again, we always put these in our UZ harnesses, and basically what you can do if you want is that is a 1UZ non-VVT-I temperature sensor for the gauge. It's a single wire sensor. You guys will have a blanking bolt in there. So effectively all you got to do is undo that bolt and you can screw in one of those. This wire doesn't go to the ECU. It only comes out at the fuse box, which we'll go through in a minute when we go through those plugs over there. And that can be used to use a gauge if you want to. So for example, let's say you had a CAN gauge. Obviously you wouldn't use that because you take the CAN data from the ECU, which would include coolant temperature, and you would send it to the dash. Okay, if you're not using a CAN enabled dash, then you can use that to plug into a sensor, which you can then go to your dash. Now, obviously, if you've got a sensor on your car already, now the best thing would be to do to match the actual sensor with your gauge, and hopefully you can fit that sensor in that hole over there. If not, obviously you can drill it out, tap it, etc. But obviously that would require removing this water bridge at the front. which you might want to do anyway, because if you're prepping your engine, you're probably going to do your water pump. So again, you're sort of going to be in there anyway, so you can pull that off, drill that out, tap it for your particular sensor and get it from there. And it's quite a convenient place. If the engine ECU and Toyota are standard taking the coolant temperature from there, there must be a reason why they choose that particular spot. Okay, and just so that you know, that's actually a leftover from, I think it's the Crown one you said VVT-i, because even the one you said VVT-i, pretty much all of them that came in the Lexuses, like the GS400, the LS400, etc., they all used MPX to communicate that data from the vehicle. The Japanese model Crown did not. It still had a single wire sensor like on a 1UZ non-VVT-i, and that carried the data to the dash. So that's actually just a leftover that they've left for the Crown, and they've actually carried it on into the 3UZ. So they're using the same part for a 1UZ VVT-i and for a 3UZ VVT-i, and that's why you got a blanking plate in there if you were ever wondering why that's the case. Okay, right, also coming out of here we have an oil control valve for the right bank. So again, that plugs in there straight away, and then down through there, if you can see, hopefully it's labeled, it is going to be the throttle. Okay, now as I said, this is a 6-speed, so he does have a 6-speed throttle. That means he's got a 6-pin plug on the throttle, not a 4-pin and a 2-pin like on the 5-speed. But again, he could swap out a 5-speed throttle body if he wanted to. We just make him a different harness for that, okay? Now, if you've seen all our other 3UZ videos, you're gonna notice that we have an 8-pin plug here and not a 6-pin plug, okay? And that's quite important. That's what makes this harness work on both the 1UZ and the 3UZ VVT-Is. Now, on the 1UZ VVT-Is, you'll see the motor has a 4-pin plug, not a 2-pin plug, like the 3UZ. So these are what are called the clutched drive-by-wire system. So effectively, there's actually a clutch inside there that the ECU can control to both engage and disengage the drive-by-wire, okay? So what we've done in this particular case is, the reason it's an 8-pin plug and 2 of them are blanked off in this particular case is that's actually the power and ground for the drive-by-wire clutch if this was a 1UZ VVT-i, okay? Now that clutch with the link, luckily if you go to the help section, you'll notice that you can actually power that clutch from the, what we would call the drive-by-wire throttle relay, which is what Link asks you to do. There's a separate relay which we'll go through in the fuse box over there, or we're not going to go through specifically, but anyway, the power to the ECU for the electronic throttle body is controlled via that relay, and that relay is controlled by the ECU. So with this particular harness, what we've done is the same wire that goes to the fuse box to control the relay also comes to the 8-pin plug over there. So again, if you were using a 1UZ VVT-i, it's actually the ECU that would be controlling the clutch on there. So if the ECU wants to shut the throttle down, it will do so by obviously taking power away from the clutch. Well, it's actually a ground, I do apologize. But they'll remove the ground from the clutch, which will effectively shut down the throttle. Okay, so that safety is nicely built in for you guys there. Okay, right, and then coming out of here as well, we have our IAT sensor. Okay, so in this case, we've got a Bosch fast response sensor, which is the one we usually use. Okay, got a nice mounting sensor on there, so you can obviously weld it to your pipes over there. And again, it's quite a long length, but we can always make it completely custom if you guys want, and obviously to any length that you guys want. You just need to let us know when we're building, or if later on you can always just buy another one if you want it longer or shorter or whatever you need. Okay, right, and then lastly coming down here is going to be our alternator plug. All right, so this is the 3-pin alternator plug that would usually go in the back over there. So you're probably wondering, Chris, why is nothing in there? Well, in this case, the customer is using a different alternator, so he's not requiring this alternator plug. Okay, now again, none of these alternator plug wires go to the ECU. I think just the alternator light would go to the ECU, but it's not the end of the world. Obviously, we've left it in there because, as per usual, I think this customer actually sold an old harness of ours to somebody else to upgrade to this one. So again, we never want to leave stuff out like that, because obviously if you wanted to sell this harness onto somebody else, because as I said, it covers a wide range. It'll do a 3UZ 5-speed, 6-speed, so that's all the way from 2000 to 2010. It'll do a 1UZ VVT-i as well. So again, large range engines will cover. So if the customer ever wanted to sell it on to somebody else, we want to make sure that he's got the ability to sell it to somebody else and they can use their standard alternator, etc. They could phone us up, get another injector harness that has the ACIS in if they're going to run naturally aspirated. So again, it makes it really nice as a product that you could sell on to somebody else. And then obviously any changes that they wanted to make, they could give us a shout and then we could do that for them. Okay. Right, so that's pretty much it for the layout of the harness and where everything goes. Hopefully that's nice and simple. It's just a U shape. It's not super complicated. Obviously, you've got basically your grommet to settle down once you actually make up your mind of where it is going to go. And other than that, really straightforward. So as I said at the end, what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the connectors All right, these are the customer connections that you guys need to make on your side. Obviously, these harnesses are completely standalone, so super simple to sort out. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our 9-pin plug. So again, this is pretty much stock now on all of our harnesses. If you watch any of our other videos, this is going to be a complete repeat, but obviously I go through it every single time because each customer needs to go through and see exactly what they're connecting. Okay. Obviously, you get a full welcome pack that even goes through the fuse box layout, tells you what each relay does, what each fuse does, etc. as well. So again, super simple there. All right, so 9-pin fuse box plug. So the first pin one is going to be a solid red. Obviously, I've got it out over there. That's going to be this 2 white wires going in there. That is our 12-volt supply that basically powers everything. Okay, now, obviously, I've left it over saying permanent 12 volts because technically you can connect it to permanent 12 volts. It makes no difference whatsoever. It's not going to power up the ECU or anything like that, or nothing's going to drain your battery. But basically, that is the main power that goes into everything. And that's why we've got a 14 gauge cable going into there. That's plenty enough for the starter solenoid. It's plenty enough for the fuel pump. Well, the one that we've put in there, which we've fused at 20 amps. Okay. Right, so the next one is black and yellow, and that's going to be our start signal. So that's this black and yellow one you can see over here. Now, keen thing to note with our Link ECU packages, the starter solenoid isn't controlled by you, by this wire over here. It's actually controlled by the ECU. So the ECU takes over once that receives a signal, and obviously it'll then crank the engine over until it starts or a predetermined time. Again, if you go through our Link videos, I think I've gone through a whole video on how to set up the starter control, but basically that's what's happening. So the way that I leave it when it goes from here is that it's looking for a 12-volt signal coming to that black with a yellow wire, okay? But you can technically go into the ECU and tell it to look for a ground signal. So if you wanted to give a ground instead of 12 volts, you just flick the setting in the ECU and that will work just fine, okay? Obviously, the reason I send it out as a positive is because 99% of the time, you guys are going to be using an ignition barrel or a switch or something along those lines. And obviously, usually that has 12 volts going to it. So again, that's sort of the easiest way to do it. And I do actually fuse it in the fuse box. So again, you can't do any damage to the ECU because I've fused it. So it comes from there, goes through a fuse, and from there it comes out and goes to the ECU, okay? So again, can't do any damage there, but that requires a 12-volt signal, or you can swap it around and use a ground signal if you wanted to as well. If you want to keep a lot of lives out of the mix, then obviously switch it over to ground to change the setting inside the ECU, okay? Yellow-green, okay, so that's going to be this one down over here. So you can see I've got it in my fingers there. Let's take a look there. Yellow with a green tracer. It says Temp, and that's the one that I was talking about, that little Temp wire, okay? That little Temp wire over there, all right? That's where that comes out. So again, it doesn't go to the ECU. It's completely coming out of the fuse box there. It's got nothing to do with that at all. It just goes straight from there to there, okay? Next up is gray, which again, I've taken out over here. That goes in over there. That one's going to come down. Obviously, it powers my fuel pump for testing purposes, but that is the fuel pump. Now, that is controlled by the ECU. Obviously, you can set that up. Again, I'll probably have a video down there about setting up the outputs, and in there, I'll talk about the fuel pump. You can set it to prime for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds, whatever you want. But basically, that is ECU controlled, okay? It is fused at 20 amps. And obviously that gray wire you can run directly to the positive side of a fuel pump. If you have a fuel pump that requires more than that, now I would caution you that there is obviously, fuel pumps have a tendency to draw a lot of current when they first turn on, but when they settle down, obviously they'll come way down in what they actually draw. So you'll be quite surprised, even quite a high, like sort of 350, 450, 520 pump, you'll be surprised how much power they actually draw, okay? Obviously, as they get older, they draw more power because obviously the parts are wearing out. But sometimes you'll be lucky to see 5 to 10 amps, even on a relatively big pump. So 20 amps is quite a lot, okay? So again, but if you wanted to have your own power source with the thicker cable, because you needed that because the power draw of your fuel pump was much bigger, you can then use that gray wire to trigger a relay at the back of the car, which would then turn on that relay to then power your fuel pump. So you still keep it ECU controlled, okay? Next up is going to be yellow with a red. So there is my yellow with a red tracer, okay? That is your check engine light, okay? I also have an LED in the fuse box there. That is also your check engine light, because obviously I don't rely on you guys to fit a check engine light, but if you want to leave it at that, you can just leave this one on here and use that as your check engine light. But usually they're tucked out of the way, so you don't see them, obviously. So if you're using a standard dash, you can just run that straight to the dash. And when we come to the testing purposes, you'll see we're going to connect that up to our dash over there to make sure that does work. So we'll see that light coming on and obviously the LED on the fuse box itself. Now, obviously the check engine light is an earth or a ground. It's being given out by the ECU, one of the outputs. So again, just make sure that you are connecting it correctly if you're using LED. Obviously this goes to the negative side of the LED and the other side will go to an ignition 12-volt supply. Okay. Next up is going to be yellow. So again, it is just a solid yellow wire, which is that one over there. And that is your tacho signal. Again, that is coming from the ECU. So it is completely, you can calibrate it to whatever gauge that you are using. So whether it's a 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder, it really doesn't matter. You will calibrate it. Obviously that is really, really nice and straightforward. And again, you'll see we're going to take that to our dash over there and we're going to be able to see that the RPM does work. Okay. Next up is 7, which is black with a red. So that's that one over there. Okay, and that is our ignition 12 volts. So basically this is your ignition switch. So once that gets 12 volts, it's actually going to activate the relays. It's going to turn on the ECU. It's going to power the whole system up. So again, it's not actually providing any power to anything. It is purely there to activate relays to turn on power supplies from there. So as I said, the big thick red cable, the 14 gauge cable, that's what's actually supplying the power to the ECU, to the starter motor, to the fuel pumps, to the coils, to the injectors. That's where it's getting its power from. That ignition with the red, you can see it's a small little 20 gauge wire, and that is purely because it is only turning on the relays to activate all the powers to the system. Okay. Right, and then number 8 is pink with the blue. Now obviously in this case, this is going to be completely useless for this customer because he's not actually using the alternator, but that is obviously coming from the alternator and it is going out so you can then attach it to your dash and it'll give you a charge light. Okay, obviously he'll have his own alternator, so he'll take care of that himself. But again, if he was to sell it to somebody else, they could then get the sub harness for the alternator, plug that in, and then they would use that wire then to take to their dash. Same as the other one, it is a ground, same as the check engine light, is a ground signal coming out. So again, if you're using an LED, make sure you connect that side to ground and the other side to ignition 12 volts. One thing to bear in mind, guys, with this, obviously this customer is not a concern, but if you are using our harnesses and you are using that alternator light and you are using a standard Toyota alternator and you are using an older dash, this is usually the type of the older dash, you need to make sure that if it is an old dash and it just has light bulbs in it, that you fit a diode. Okay, the reason is that the dash can then back feed through to the alternator. I've actually seen it keep harnesses completely alive on some older vehicles. Okay, so just make sure that is the case. Otherwise, what you can do is if your dash gives you the ability to swap it out for LED bulbs, well, that solves your problem, because obviously if it's an LED bulb, it becomes a diode and therefore it won't backfeed into the system. Okay, so that's kind of your two options. Either swap the bulb out for an LED instead of an incandescent bulb, or actually fit a diode in line there. Okay, now do bear in mind, these are not one of the alternators that require like an exciter. There's an ignition and a permanent 12 volt source that is already going to the alternator, and that takes care of everything. So even if the alternator light is not connected, the alternator will still charge and behave as normal, guys. Okay, so you don't even actually have to connect it if you don't want to. If you want to just have a voltmeter on your dash that measures the voltage, knock yourself out. Okay, perfect. And then lastly, number 9 is yellow with the black. So you can see there yellow with the black, and that is going to be your oil pressure light. So again, this is for your dash if you want to connect it up. Again, it is a ground signal. Okay, and in this case it is actually going to come from the ECU. So for our oil, the switch, what we do is we do actually take it to the ECU as digital input. It's just so you guys can use that as a safety. So if you are only running the oil pressure switch, if your light comes on, you can actually tell the ECU to shut it down, etc. So again, clearly labeled over here, you'll see we've got digital input 4 is MOPS, which is to speak for oil pressure. And then obviously we've got the oil pressure then coming out of the ECU. Right, quick correction, guys, I do apologize. Obviously, we take the oil pressure to the ECU so you guys can use it, but it gets split up and also goes to the fuse box to then be used for a dash. So excuse my incorrect fact there. We don't actually have the oil light coming from the ECU out. We're not using an output to do that. Obviously, we just split it and goes both to the ECU and to the fuse box for the dash. Okay. Right, so that is the 9-pin plug over there. So again, hopefully super useful for you guys. Again, you can just go and connect what you need to connect and leave what you don't need to connect from there. Obviously, in this case, as you can clearly see, I'm just connecting permanent 12 volts, fuel pump. I've just stripped that to give myself an ignition, and I'm just going to strip that to give myself a starter signal, and the engine will run. Okay, so technically that's kind of the only 4 you need to connect to actually get the whole thing to run. Okay. Right, so in that analog connector which we spoke of, which was this one down here, that 6-pin one, what we do have in there is analog 8, 9, 10, and 11. And then we've got sensor ground and 5 volts. So obviously if you're going to be using an analog input, you would need either both the 5 volts and the sensor ground, or just the sensor ground. So remember, for things like temperature, you just use the sensor ground. But if you are going to do that with a temperature sensor, you would need to pull it up to 5 volts with a resistor, okay? So obviously it would be useless for us to give you just those 4 wires. We've given you the sensor ground and the 5 volts so you can safely connect other sensors as well to that, okay? Now, obviously, remember, with things like this, if you're not using the fuel, technically it's kind of the same. There's a 5-volt sensor ground and an analog input and a temp input in there. So again, you can use that as well if you need to. Digital connector. This is the 4-pin one over here. Now, digital inputs are kind of ones that go either to 12 volts or either to ground, or like a signal like a crank sensor or a cam sensor. So again, they don't require us to provide you with like a 5 volts and a sensor ground, etc. So that is just going to be digital 5, 6, 7, and 8. So as you see there, everything is labeled over here where it goes to as well. But again, those are for future use if you would like. And then on your CAN connector, pin 1 is 12 volts, 2 is ground, and then you have CAN low, CAN high. Now, I've put a little note at the bottom here and a star down there to say that Link and Haltech swap around the CAN H and CAN L connection. So what I mean is that when you look at this plug over here, obviously I've got 12 volts in 1, 2 is ground. That's exactly how Haltech works. So you can see 1 is 12 volts, 2 is ground, but CAN high and CAN low are the other way around. So on Haltech, it would be CAN high and CAN low. On Link, it's CAN low and CAN high. So in this case, what we've basically done is we've taken the little extension harness that comes with that. We've cut off the DTM socket connector, and then what we've done is we've put a 4-pin connector on. This will then interface with that, and obviously here we've swapped CAN high and CAN low around, but when it gets to the other side, it is obviously correct. So just make sure when you guys are fitting a Haltech product to a Link that you may understand that obviously the CAN high and CAN low are swapped around. Obviously with our harnesses, because we don't know what you're going to fit, we wire that CAN plug under the assumption that you're going to use other Link products, okay? So we've wired it how Link would wire it up. So if you're using a Link CAN product, like a Link CAN Lambda or something like that, that is how they would have it wired up. But because you're using a Haltech, on the Haltech side, we've swapped it around to make it correct and make sure CAN high and CAN low are the correct way around. So that's one thing I wanted to go through with you guys. So again, if you guys are fitting Haltech products to Link, just be aware of that, okay? Right, so that is basically it for the layout of the harness. I've gone through all the plugs that you guys can connect on your side. Obviously, these are auxiliary connectors. So again, it's only if you want to add something in later on. But everything is really straightforward. It just makes a U-shape around the engine. So that is the entire harness and what you connect from there. So what's left over now is going to be basically your main starter cable for your starter motor. So you can see that one coming out there and going to my battery positive terminal over there. Your earthing, you should have one coming from your block. So you can see this is just bolted directly to the block over there, and that's going to the negative of my battery over there. And what I normally advise people to do is at the back of the cylinder head here, you can take another earth from here to the firewall as well. Now, again, it depends on your setup, whether your firewall is a good earthing point. But I normally tell people, and the way the Toyota do it is they have about 3. So they normally have the earth from the block to the battery. It usually goes block, chassis, battery, and that obviously then provides the ground for the entire car as well as the engine. And obviously because at the block, it's basically where the starter motor is pulling its current through. Then what you guys can do is take an earth from here to there. That just helps the engine harness earth from there as well, okay? And obviously the last one that they normally do is they'd normally do like an earth strap, so like no insulation on, just like literally like a ribbon almost, if you want to call it that. And that goes from the gearbox bolt to the chassis. Okay, so remember that all of these connections you're taking from there to there and there to there are from the engine to the chassis. So we are still utilizing the engine as basically the star point ground. So basically the battery goes battery, chassis, block, that, and then that. Okay, all right. So basically that's it. I did miss out your alternator cable. So again, in this case, I don't know what alternator he's using, but he's going to have a main power cable coming from there. So you've got main power cable coming from there to your battery. Normally, I would advise you guys to fuse that, okay? And that's going to be dictated by the size of your alternator, okay? So if your alternator is a 100 amp alternator, you might want to put a 120 amp alternator fuse on there. If it's a much bigger one, say a 200 amp, you're going to have to get the correct fuse for that. Now, some guys, what they'll basically do is they'll take it from the alternator and they'll take it straight to the battery. We do that for the starter motor, and that's obviously because it's drawing so much current. But with an alternator, I prefer to have it fused as close to the battery as is humanly possible, because obviously if anything goes wrong, you want to make sure that connection is cut. And if you look at any standard Toyota vehicle, you'll see they do exactly the same thing. They have a very short wire from the fuse box to the battery, okay? And then that fuse box will usually have 100, 120, 150 amp fuse in it for the alternator, okay? So alternator main power, starter main power, earth. That's kind of all that you need to add on to the thing apart from the actual engine harness itself, okay? Right, so that's it basically. I'm gonna go get ready to do all the testing and come back and do the videos for the testing for you there. Just a quick heads up, it's not an extensively long video. I've got a bunch of videos on links on how I test the inputs and the outputs. It would take me another hour and a half to go through that all with you, but we test everything, each individual injector, each individual coil, you know, the whole 9 yards. So when I come doing some testing, it'll be a few things, but not a full-on barrage like an hour and 40 long video. But I do have those videos in a playlist that you guys can go and look at if you want to go more in depth on that type of stuff, okay? Right, so I'll see you in a second. Right guys, so we're back now for the testing of the engine harness, and as I said in the beginning, it's been made up of 2 sections, one with the ignition on and one with the engine actually running, okay? Now obviously here's a list of what we're going to be testing. You can see it is quite limited. We're not testing a whole load of things. Now that's mainly because when you have an aftermarket harness, there is a lot to test, okay, and it takes quite a long time. So for instance, we're going to be testing every single injector to make sure it's at the correct location, that it is actually firing. We're going to be testing every single coil. We're going to be testing the oil control valves by pulsing them. We're going to be testing the mag boost valve by pulsing it. We're going to be testing every single pressure and temperature sensor with my little harness that I make over here. So again, it is for oil and fuel. So you can see there whether it's a 4-pin or a 3-pin plug, all accounted for there. And we use a little TPS to obviously mimic a 0 to 5 volt signal. And we've got a coolant temperature sensor there just to mimic the temperature signal to make sure that it is actually working, okay? But what I do have is a sort of playlist of all the link stuff, and in there I show you guys how to test the inputs and the outputs on there. So again, I'm not going to bore you guys with a excessively long testing video. Obviously we do that all in the background, and I just come back and show you guys a couple of things that are quite important to work and make sure that everything is working 100%, okay? Right, so let's go through what we're going to be testing, and then we'll jump into the testing with the ignition on. So with the ignition on, it's going to be quite a basic check. So we're basically checking that the check engine light is working. So that LED will pop up over there. You'll see the check engine light is already on the dash. Unfortunately, the link ECUs do default to ground on their outputs, and obviously because the dash is permanently powered up straight from the battery, that's obviously going to be on slightly dim because it's not properly. But obviously when we put the ignition on, that's going to go a much brighter color, okay? Next up, we're going to have our charge/alternator light and oil pressure light. So basically what I've done is, because it's an IS200 dash, those particular signals are not analog. They're not wires going into the back of the dash. They're actually via MPX, which is Toyota's sort of old CAN bus system. So you'll see I've got my little device here, and you can see I've got my alternator, which is the pink with the blue, and my oil pressure, which is yellow with the black. So they're going into that. That's translating the MPX for the dash. So we're going to see our battery light and our oil light appear on there, okay? What you'll also notice is, as I said earlier in the layout, the oil pressure switch is actually connected to both the ECU and the fuse box. So in actual fact, we can see on the software, we'll see when the oil pressure switch is active and obviously goes off. So again, that's for you guys, you can build in sort of safeties. That way, if the oil light came on, the ECU could shut down the engine and obviously try and save your engine. Okay, right, so, and just for the alternator, obviously, as you're aware from the layout, this customer is not using a standard Toyota alternator, but obviously for me to make sure that our wiring is correct, I've obviously plugged in a alternator harness just for the testing purposes there. That lets me know that obviously I can see the fact that the battery is sitting at 14 volts when the engine is running, and obviously we can test the alternator light, okay? Right, so lastly is going to be the fuel pump. So again, as I said, the fuel pump is ECU controlled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate the output, which in this case is auxiliary 6. You can see there it's labeled as fuel pump. So all I'm going to do is activate the output on test. You're going to hear it come on, and then I'm going to turn it off and you're going to hear it go off. You will also hear it actually prime. It is set to prime for 3 seconds when you turn the ignition on. So you're actually going to hear the fuel pump in the background when I do put the ignition on. Okay. Then coming to the engine running section, obviously starter circuit. So as you're aware with all of our link harnesses that we've done so far, the starter is actually controlled via the ECU, okay? So effectively why we're just gonna touch it on 12 volts. The ECU is gonna take over. It's using an output to activate the starter relay. And once it hits either a time limit, which I think is like 3 or 4 seconds, or the engine RPM goes above 400, then the starter motor cuts out, okay? Really nice system. It means you can't overrun the starter motor, etc. So really, really nice to have that, okay? Next up is going to be ACIS Mac. Now, technically, I'm not going to do this as part of the running test because obviously, like I said, with the Mac boost valve, all we can really do is pulse width modulate the output. So that's already been done in the background. But obviously, if this was using an ACIS system, we would check that as we do normally with all our other harnesses. Okay. Next up is going to be the drive-by-wire test. Again, super simple. We just got the pedal over there. We're just going to press the accelerator pedal and the engine's going to rev up. That's making sure that the throttle is working. Obviously, I have a video on how to calibrate the electronic throttles on link. So again, you can go watch that in our playlist if you want to see exactly how to do that. Then we're going to do injectors and coils. So what I mean by that basically is I'm going to unplug each injector one by one. That's going to then allow me to hear that the engine is misfiring on each and every cylinder. And that's going to tell me that obviously everything is correct and it is firing fully sequentially. And we know that every cylinder is firing as it should do, which is great. Next up is going to be tacho. So again, we've got our yellow wire over there coming out. That is actually going straight to the dash because the tacho signal goes straight to the dash because unfortunately MPX isn't fast enough to communicate the change in RPM for the dash, or at least that's what Toyota thought, so that does go directly to there. Coolant temp, again, same thing. I'm basically just using the single wire coolant temp sensor that I've fitted to my engine over here. So you can see that's one over there. I've actually just put it into the temp wire, which I said, and that obviously goes out by the fuse box there. And again, because coolant temperature is not transmitted directly to the dash in the IS200, you'll see my yellow with the green wire over there is going into the MPX device, which is then translating, and then the temperature will appear on the dash. So I know that that particular wire is okay. Obviously, we'll see the coolant and the intake air temperature and everything on the software when the engine is running, so I'm not too worried about that. You'll actually see it on the screen when that is happening. Okay, right, so that's basically all the tests that we're going to carry out today. So let's jump in and start with the testing with the ignition on. And obviously, because it's quite difficult to get the ignition on single-handedly, I'm going to put the camera down. Rightio. And here we go, 3, 2, 1. You can probably hear the fuel pump whirring away in the background there. So again, super happy with that. That is actually working. We'll test that in a minute, obviously, as well. But yeah, so let's jump in and start with the first one, which is the check engine light. So as you can see, when I put the ignition on, we've got our LED on the fuse box lighting up. So that's great. And then we've got it lighting up nice and bright on the cluster there as well. You'll see now we've also got our oil light and our battery lights. And I'll just quickly connect the ECU. And you'll see down here, digital input 4, oil pressure is now active. Okay, right, so let's move down to the alternator and the oil pressure light. So what I'm basically gonna do is to make sure, 1, that they are working, and 2, they're connected to the right place. I'm gonna go over, I'm gonna disconnect the alternator now, and we should see the alternator light go off. And then when I reconnect it, it's gonna go on again. And again, this is a nice thing with the modular harnesses. These DTM connectors are really nice easy to take apart. Right, so you can see there now our alternator light has gone off. And let's plug that in again. There you go. And now we'll pop over here and we'll see there our alternator light has come back on again. Right. Now let's do the oil. So again, I'm just going to quickly disconnect that oil. You can see our oil light has gone off, and you can also see our digital input 4 has also gone to off as well. And plug that back in again. And you can see our oil light is back on, and our digital input 4 is also back to being active. Okay, right, so now then let's do number 4, which is the fuel pump. So again, as I said, it is in auxiliary 6. So I've gone to auxiliary outputs. You can see number 6 is fuel pump. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to change that to test on. And there you go. You can hear that fuel pump is working away there, whirring in the background. And I'm going to turn that back onto fuel pump. There you go. Okay. And if you're wondering about the priming where you can set that up, you can see down here you've got fuel pump control. Pop it in there. And you can see there you've got prime time. So now we've got 3 seconds, but you can alter that. You can make it 1 second, 2 second, 5 second, etc. as well. Okay, so that's relatively straightforward. Right, fantastic. Right, okay, so that's the testing with the ignition on. As I've said, and I'll reiterate, obviously there's a lot of testing that goes on in the background. I just want to bore you guys with a whole long video where I'm testing each injector output. That's why I've done the separate videos on how to test the inputs and the outputs, because obviously each setup will be different depending on your customer, depending on your setup if you've wired it. So again, it's basically you need to look at your pinout where you've allocated everything, and then you can use that video to show you how to test the outputs and make sure that everything is working correctly. And as I said, obviously for things like pressure sensors and temperature sensors, I make a little harness like this. Obviously not really viable in your case, but I make a little harness like this so I can mimic a 0 to 5 volt signal, and I can mimic a temperature signal as well, so I can test oil pressure, oil temp, fuel pressure, fuel temp, etc., etc. Okay. Right, so that's it. So I'm going to pop away. I'm going to get the engine slightly warm, and then I'm going to pop back, and then we're going to do the testing, because obviously you want to see that coolant temperature working on the dash there. So see you guys in a second. Right, guys, so we're back now for the testing with the engine actually running. So I'm going to do a quick recap of what we're going to be doing, and then we'll jump in and get it all started up. So first of all, the starter circuit. So as I said, the ECU in this case is controlling the starter. So all I'm going to do is take that black with the yellow wire, touch it on 12 volts, and the ECU is going to take over and it's going to start the engine. Then what we're going to do is obviously the ACIS Mac, I've obviously tested off screen. So we're not going to go through that because I can't do it physically while the engine's running. Drive-by-wire test, I'm just going to basically press the accelerator down. That's going to then show you that that is working 100%. Then the injectors and coils. So all I'm basically going to do is I'm going to remove each injector one by one. So you hear the engine misfiring, so we can see that each and every single cylinder is firing sequentially as it should. Then tacho, we're just going to come back over here and make sure that we've got a tacho signal coming through on the dash over there. And then obviously the coolant temp, well, you can already see at the moment it is already all the way up. Obviously the engine is about 50 degrees. So again, that is already working, but we'll come back and hopefully that should have risen a bit by the time we finish the test. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. And as I said, I'm basically just going to touch this on here. And there you go. Brilliant. Okay, so starter circuit's okay. Let's go test the drive-by-wire. By wire. Okay, injectors and coils. So let's do that. So starting at number 1, number 2, sorry, number 3, number 5, number 7. Go over to the other side. Let's do number 8. 6. Let's do number 4. And let's do number 2. Brilliant. Okay, so again, every single injector working as it should do. Now then, let's look at the tacho. Perfect. Alright, and the coolant temperature. It has actually gone up. We're at about 57 degrees on the coolant temperature. Perfect. All right. So now we'll just quickly get my ear defenders off there, but that's great. Okay, so perfect. Exactly as I expected to. Everything's running nice and smooth. Obviously, you can see the Lambdas. You probably saw on the screen the Lambdas obviously working there via the Haltech WB2, so that's all gravy. But yeah, everything is done. All sorted. So obviously when the customer gets it, he can start it up technically on this map. Although there'll be some changes you're going to have to make, things like injectors and so on and so forth, because obviously he's got different injectors. So you'll have to put all of that data into the ECU before he starts it up. But this customer is very competent, so obviously that is absolutely no trouble at all for him to sort out. Okay, right, so just a quick one. Obviously it's a standalone ECU. Technically I have physically started it here, but again, this is a base map. This is by no means something that you should be driving around on at all, okay? It is definitely something that is just there to get your engine started up. Make sure you've got no coolant leaks, make sure you've got no oil leaks, make sure that everything is okay, let it get up to temperature, let it turn on your cooling fans, and make sure that everything is 100% before you get it on the dyno, okay? So again, 100%, this is not something that you would be driving around on for 6 months until you can have time to get on a dyno. It has to go straight on a dyno. Whatever you get the ECU with is just there to get it started up, warmed up, and make sure that everything is working 100%, okay? Right, so let's obviously finish this off. Let's get this off, let's get it to the customer so we can get his vehicle up and running. But for everything else, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask me down below. I try to get through to as many as I possibly can. You can also contact us at info@phoenixenginemanagement.com, or you can find us on Facebook as well. And again, when you guys are asking queries now on Facebook, hopefully you get a response with a video showing you what type of data that we do need from you guys to give you a quote, just to try and speed up the process and we're not having to go backwards and forwards with about 20 messages trying to find all the information out there. All right, but guys, thanks for watching. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit.